Zion Williamson, 19 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. CJ McCollum, 19 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. Jordan Hawkins, 14 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists on 6 of 13 from the field. Matt Ryan, 12 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and 3 of 7 from 3. Welcome into the pod, Pat. Thank you for coming on.
For sure. Appreciate you having me on here. I think this was certainly a game we were looking forward to. I think one way or another it showed us a couple things. Certainly a couple things to take away that were positive, and then as well as some things that were glaring in terms of being deficiencies that this team has kind of been dealing with for some time now. But I think regardless, this was a game that needed to happen, and ultimately an outcome that hopefully pushes this team in the right direction kind of moving forward.
Yeah, I can totally agree on that point. Just one big glaring kind of stat from the game is the Pelicans kind of getting out rebounded 64 to 39, and I feel like that was kind of the main issues of the ball game tonight.
Yeah, I think statistically, right, that'll obviously be that glaring point you're kind of speaking on there. But I think a lot of that rebounding, woes that they're facing has been something that they've been dealing with at times. Looking back towards last year, I think a lot of that comes down to kind of roster construction, kind of the styles that some of these players certainly prefer to play at, and some of the fits that we're dealing with here, with this roster currently.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it just seems like, certain people might happen to be playing out of position, and, some nights that works for the Pels, and then, you see a night like tonight when, you have either a Vals or a Larry just kind of out there, and it just kind of seems, a little tougher against some of these better teams like the Warriors tonight.
Yeah, I think really the biggest deficiency currently that this team has is at the 5 spot. Albeit this game didn't turn out the way that we wanted, and obviously lost pretty handedly. Kind of starting from the second quarter on, Golden State was kind of able to take control and kind of withstand any runs that we had attempted to kind of make later in that second half, trying to tighten things up, but. Really, even despite that, I feel pretty good about the players that we have on our roster and our current rotation, and the flexibility and the different styles we can play, and the versatility of the roster when looking at positions 1 through 4. Essentially, you've got the big three pretty much slotted at 1 through 3, with the addition of Herb playing whether you want to call it power forward or small forward, and then obviously you've got coming down the pipeline, somebody like Jose, which is going to be that Energizer Bunny, the guy that kind of, gets into the opposing team a little bit, causes some turnovers, able to hit some timely shots, helps create energy, on those games that you're kind of dragging your feet a little bit, whether that's on the second night of a back-to-back or whatever really the situation is. And then obviously a guy like Trey Murphy, who obviously is kind of an up-and-coming guy who's got a lot of those skills that you look for in an up-and-coming young player in terms of athleticism, size, and shooting. So, looking at that on a nightly basis, there's certainly a lot of opportunities to create advantageous matchups and have positions of strength out there on the floor, whether it's against any other team in the league. But it seems like on a night-in, night-out basis, the big issue that we're facing nightly is that 5 position. I think it's more in terms of fit with this team, right? The things that we need our 5-man to offer every single night, and ultimately provide to the rest of the unit, is something that we're currently not getting with Jonas at the moment, and obviously going forward, I think that it's not something that can really be changed in terms of playing harder or changing scheme. Currently, I think it's just the way he plays and his makeup and his athletic ability really kind of handcuffs this team to ultimately lowering the ceiling of this group. I think this group currently constructed can be a competitive team on a night in night out basis, but ultimately I think that ceiling is kind of capped off at a borderline playoff team because you're just not able to compete with those higher end teams that not only one are going to put a lot of pressure, um, you know, in the pick and roll between top level ball handlers and players that are going to play with the ball, but we're also struggling to end possession. So um, it just makes it harder on the group itself to play really, really effective defense for 20 seconds, 24 seconds, to force a miss and then ultimately give up a rebound. And then you're kind of starting back over from scratch. So um, I think that's certainly the biggest area that front office, Griff and Trajan need to start looking in that direction. And I would imagine are going to start fielding some calls sooner than later.
I definitely believe it's kind of glaring to come into this game and get out rebounded by a team historically who, that's kind of their woes as well as kind of rebounding that ball because they have a lot of smaller lineups and everything like that. And for us to basically get out rebounded by 25 against them, that really kind of shows what you're saying is that glaring hole at the 5 spot. And the biggest thing of kind of just ending possessions. I feel like we really do a good job maybe going one on one with these guys and individual defense, but it's then getting that long rebound or kind of finishing those possessions.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that can stem from the fact that we do struggle so much at the point of attack, right? As at the 5 spot, whether that's being able to hedge or blitz or ice a coverage, but ultimately like you've mentioned in the past that with JV really we're very limited to just kind of playing that drop coverage, which ultimately teams kind of know that's the route that we're going to go, and a lot of times we struggle from a rebounding perspective due to the fact that we're having to play drop coverage and we're already kind of pre-setting this rotation and guys are flying around from one guy to the next because they're having to cover for that drop coverage and that inability to kind of stop you know um, pressure or other teams ball handlers trying to put pressure on the rim. We can't contain that. They're already kind of starting to come downhill, which causes one guy to step over and kind of step into that helper's position, which then sets the rest of the defense in rotation, covering up shooters on the perimeter. And then from that point, it's a lot harder to find a body and track down a rebound whenever you're playing in space rather than being next to a guy that you're supposed to be guarding. So I think it's twofold. It's not just a rebounding problem; it's a defensive containment problem from that 5 spot because we're already having to cover for them so much.
Yeah, and that always puts a little more pressure on, say, a Herb Jones who tonight had his hands full with Steph, but at the end of the day, you can't really get mad at him for his individual defense when that back line isn't supported that well.
Yeah, obviously nobody has figured out a way for a decade now, right, to successfully kind of slow down the Warriors' offense or Steph himself from an individual perspective. But there certainly are characteristics of defenses that have had some success against them, and some of that is that those 5 mans when they're coming off screens have to be a little more involved. You found that teams will tend to go a little bit smaller just to have a little bit more mobility out there, just to kind of at least buy those defenders a little bit, a extra split second when they're chasing Steph around numerous ball screens. And obviously, you could see that that's something that we're trying to somewhat emulate with Larry. But really, in terms of what Larry provides, I think he's being put into a position that ultimately probably isn't very fair to him, where he's almost having to assume the responsibilities of a starting caliber center in this league. Even though he's not starting on a nightly basis, those responsibilities fall to him just because, from the get go, we know that they're very, there are a lot of limitations from JV's perspective in terms of mobility and athleticism and ability to play in space against some of these high level players. So um, I think you're kind of just seeing a trickle down effect where we're dealing with two or three guys in that 4 or 5 spot that are just really kind of being mismanaged, and they're being put in a position where expectations are too high, and we're throwing too much at them for really what their abilities are. So I think that's really the big issue for this team, and something that I feel should really be addressed as soon as possible.
Yeah, and to go along with that, we kind of discussed that the Warriors didn't necessarily play their best game, coming off of a back to back. And really, what opened this game up was in that third quarter, they went on one of their runs, but they were able to get those rebounds. And mainly it was from kind of those other guys. I mean, you look at kind of the stats from their starters, and besides Steph, no one really kind of hurt them there. Besides Moody hitting a couple shots, but that was mainly off getting those second chance points. And then whenever that second unit came in, Gary Payton and Jackson really seemed to benefit from kind of those extra possessions that they had been getting the third quarter and on.
Yeah, I think, and one of the bigger things that giving up offensive rebounds ultimately does to a team that is kind of trying to find their identity. And I would say it's probably not a far fetched or outlandish statement to say that the Pelicans team itself is a team that's trying to find their defensive identity. I wouldn't call them a team that their foundation is defense, and a team that thrives on defense, right? They have a lot of really high level skilled offensive players, right, that have some abilities to be good defenders, but that's really not where they make their money, right, on the defensive end. So especially dealing with a group like that is going to be a little more fragile in terms of buying in from a possession to possession basis. Being able to end those possessions when they do buy in and get stops and compete is super vital. In terms of keeping them engaged and motivated, and having them buy into it. So, I mean, besides the fact that statistically it's an issue in terms of just keeping the energy up, keeping them involved, and keeping them locked in on those defensive principles on a possession to possession basis. The inability to end possessions and rebound the basketball really is something that if they're not able to get a handle on, or figure out a solution to that in a timely manner, that's something that I think that could really infiltrate the team, and kind of bleed into the overall camaraderie, and obviously the ability to improve as a team.
Yeah, and kind of just looking at other things that I at least saw was even with Brandon Ingram being out with due to injury today, you would have maybe thought that that offense would have had a little more um, turnovers, and they did a pretty good job with only having 11 tonight. So that was a good sign that their main ball handler, who usually has the ball in their hands a lot, was out, and you would think that the turnovers would go up because of that, because other people are handling the ball or have more responsibility, and they seem to keep that in check with 11. So that was probably a pretty good sign.
Right. Yeah, I agree. That kind of just hammers home the point that I was touching on earlier. I think outside of the rebounding issue, I think there were a lot of positives to take from it. I thought you saw a guy like Jordan Hawkins come out in obviously a pretty sensitive situation. Like you mentioned, Bi was a late scratch under this game, which allowed the opportunity for Jordan to step into that starting lineup tonight and get his first NBA start. And I thought he played really, really, really well. I think you're not only kind of seeing what he was touted for coming into the league, which was being a high level shooter. He's not only shown the ability and the desire to shoot it, but he's already shooting at a really effective clip, and he has the ability to get off tough shots. He's got a super quick release, and just has a keen ability to kind of find space and get off shots. But to my surprise, he's been a very effective defender. I thought he's been able to move his feet, even though he's a little bit undersized. He's been able to move his feet, stay in front of bigger players. And I think if you look at the numbers, he probably was our second or third highest rebounder tonight, which he did a really good job of, rebounding out of his area. He was tracking down longer rebounds, which is great, right? But this isn't something that you want to have to rely on, a 6'3" combo guard to be one of your highest level rebounders. Um, but again, kind of looking at his development, his production, I think that, and obviously it's early on, and we're still working through some of the development that um, we're working on in terms of a guy like Dyson. But I think obviously the early success and obviously the way that Jordan plays is something that really gives this team and this front office maybe some flexibility moving forward, potentially shift some guys around in terms of how quickly he's kind of been able to come up to speed and really start producing and contributing to this team so early on.
He's been really good for the Pels, in my opinion, and something we discussed as well is just him coming in, being a rookie, a young guy who has confidence, especially with, three bigger talents with Bi, Zion, and CJ around him, to come into the game and feel confident enough whenever he touches the ball. He's kind of got that green light and, shoots him quick, and he's not really hesitating because of the other people who are around him or the gravity of those other guys. So that's always good to see. It's kind of, another Trey Murphy out there where, it took him a little bit, I think Trey did, but once he started, hitting some shots and got in the flow of the offense and everything, he was good to go. So I think seeing Hawkins just basically come in from game one and then all the way up until tonight when he started to, never even lose confidence, just shoot it whenever he touches the ball and, let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I think the timing of this is really really advantageous for the Pels. I think the ability to see him kind of be inserted in there right away, and his ability to kind of play off of different guys. He's been someone who we can kind of throw in to any group, and he still finds a way to be effective. I think that's something that really expedites right the timing that this team has to start looking in other directions based on his early development and the contributions that he was making. If he was coming into these games and either wasn't getting playing time or when he was playing was looking shell shocked, wasn't really looking for his shot, or was looking overwhelmed from an athletic standpoint or ability to at least compete on the defensive end, I think that you would be a little bit more wary of potentially moving off of guys like Dyson or Najee, here in the coming weeks and working up to the trade deadline. But with seeing that, I think the Pels have a really strong 7 or 8 guys. I think if you have the right construction in terms of that 5 spot, I think you're able to then shift Larry back to a more comfortable position where I feel like he should be playing a little bit more of that backup power forward. That he gives you the ability to, with the right 5 man next to him, you can play him at the 4 and kind of go bigger because he is a little bit more mobile next to another 5. And then if there's that specific, team or situation when kind of looking back to that Phoenix series a couple years ago, you were able to see him kind of get put in there in very specific situations and thrive as a small ball 5. But I think having him being put in the position of having to play pretty much starter level minutes at the 5 spot not only is an injustice to him, but it's also not fair to the rest of the team and the rotation because you're already kind of stripping that rotation down from the get go because you're having to go from JV. So I would say sticking with that 7 or 8 key guys and then starting to now look maybe elsewhere to potentially make a move here in the coming weeks, I think would be something that you certainly would want to do sooner than later just to allow the team the most extensive amount of time to potentially gel that new group. But I think certainly a move like that raises this team's ceiling and essentially gives them, really no, I wouldn't say flaws, but any areas of concern or areas that they couldn't feel like on any given night they would be in an advantageous position.
No doubt about it. Just kind of going off what you said there, big guy kind of looking for it. I mean, if it was up to you, I mean, is there any guys that you see just early on that could, maybe be a target for the Pelicans if you think this is something that they could be doing here in the next couple weeks, or like you said, down the road for that trade deadline?
Yeah, I think in terms of throwing names out there, before going through everybody and start breaking down deals, I'd want to take a look at some of those. I think it's easier we could talk about characteristics of a guy that I think fit well. I think really what you're looking for in a five position is the Pels need to go away from somebody that potentially is offensively oriented essentially. There will never be a situation, and obviously I'll tell. This is a caveat. Everything that I'm saying is based on the fact that I'm assuming this team is healthy, right? This team's ceiling is something that we look at when they've got the full cupboard of ingredients in place, right? So assuming you have a guy like CJ, a guy like Brandon, a guy like Zion, a guy like Trey Murphy coming off the bench, the emergence of somebody like Jordan Hawkins who can shoot the ball, it looks like he can play in the mid range. I wouldn't be surprised before too long you start to see him living a little bit more around the rim, maybe shooting some runners from floaters. You have at least four guys there that need the ball offensively and deservedly so should have the ball in their hands over a guy like JV. So when I'm thinking of a five position, I want somebody who can be just as effective on the game without taking one shot. If this person, happens to provide 8, 10, 12 points, well, then it's just icing on top of the cake. But this player needs to be able to be mobile. They need to be able to guard, in space, move their feet, which ultimately is going to allow our defense to be a little more versatile because then we can start, addressing and attacking ball screens in a different way and allows our guys to stay out of rotation for longer periods. Besides being, you know, rangy, athletic, have the ability to move their feet, they need to be somebody that can somewhat protect the rim. And now that doesn't need to be in terms of a guy that blocks 4 or 5 shots a game, or be an incredible intimidator around the rim. They need to be able to play around the rim and be in the right spot in the right time in terms of just being able to be mobile and rotate with the rest of the team. And then lastly, we obviously love to find somebody kind of segueing off the rest of this conversation that can ultimately end games, or end possessions with rebounds, essentially. Um, so, I mean, a guy that I would think of just off the top of my head would be a guy like Robert Williams. Um, Very athletic guy. He has struggled with some injuries in the past, which potentially, um, you know, might make it a little bit easier to acquire him. But he's the exact kind of mold that you're looking for, and that was something that he had shown in Boston playing next to guys like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum with the ability to really play in space, move his feet, defend at the rim. And then he was able to be a vertical threat as well on the offensive end in terms of pick and roll and catching lobs. So I think that that's kind of the mold that they're looking for. And by doing that, you're really leaning into those 3 or 4 guys that we mentioned earlier offensively and allowing them to kind of have the burden of you know moving this team in the right direction offensively, but yet giving them the support that they need from that center position.
Yeah. Just kind of wrapping things up here. I think that was some great insight, and just wanted to get your thoughts on if you had anything else from this game that you see or saw that stood out. If it was from Zion or CJ or just the team as a whole, Coach Willie Green. Is there anything else that you kind of want to touch up on before we close this thing out?
Yeah, I would say that it's important to keep in mind, obviously, coming off of a loss like that, and then we outlined a couple of areas of concern that, you know, the sky is not falling. It's early in the season. We knew that this was going to be a team coming in um, to SKC that it's a tough team to beat, right? They're at the back end of a dynasty, but certainly are one of the better teams in the history of this league. Led by one of the best players, who arguably is still probably in his prime. So, regardless of who was out there for us or how we were playing, it was always going to be a tough matchup. Would we have liked to come out and perform better and ultimately win that game? Sure. But again, it's early. This team is still growing. I think you can take just as much away from one of these games that kind of show you the issues that you have. Now it's just about taking those issues and finding a pathway to ultimately improving that so that when you get later down in the season and you're playing against not only the Warriors but other top teams in the league, they don't have an area that they can already go to, that you have as a weakness, and that they can, take advantage of it and put you in difficult situations. Outside of that, I've liked what I've seen from Zion and CJ, and prior to tonight, obviously Brandon being out, I think the big three is kind of working their way into it. Um, they're finding ways to be productive. Um, and then one thing I did like, even though it probably was not the most beneficial in terms of what was happening with the game, I did enjoy seeing the team play with a little bit of emotion. Do I think it was appropriate in terms of allowing the officials to dictate the emotion coming out of them? No, but it was nice to see them at least show some displeasure. Right, you could tell that they wanted this game, despite the outcome. They wanted to find a way to beat Golden State. They wanted to, um, they wanted to work for the respect from them and gain that respect from a former champion and team that was a dynasty, and still arguably could add to that dynasty. But I thought it was refreshing to see not only Coach Willie, be there in support of his team by picking up that technical, but you saw a guy like Herb voicing some frustration, which is just ultimately and unfortunately it's part of this league. You have to be heard at some point to kind of get that respect from other players and from officials. So hopefully, kind of being more vocal and expressing that is something that they can benefit from. But I think the biggest thing is just learn from your mistakes. Don't be naive about the issues that you currently have, and don't be afraid to take some chances if you ultimately want this team ceiling to be as high as it possibly can.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it before we end here. But it's always tough losing that first one, and especially in this fashion. But like you said, I feel like it can definitely bring out some positives for this team going forward. And again, get on down 130 to 102 tonight. Yeah, it looks bad, but hopefully, they're back on the drawing board tomorrow and can start moving ahead for this game Wednesday, which is another big matchup against OKC, the team that knocked us out of the play-in last year. So hopefully there's some good news on the horizon about BI. There should be an injury update tomorrow, but if he can't go Wednesday, then we go with the same group that we had tonight, and hopefully we learned a few things, and we can get back on track with another win in OKC in a ESPN game.
Absolutely, yeah. Looking forward to another opportunity. Again, we've got another super talented team coming in. We're going to go ahead and be playing another super talented primary ball handler in Shea. Um, so we're going to have another opportunity to take a look at that five position and seeing how we can hopefully improve that with the current team, and potentially see if there's any way to improve this team from an outside perspective as we move forward.
Definitely. That's all I got. And, always let's go Pelicans, and I'll see you Wednesday.